Kumlen Black Gemara. This is Hoshana Rabba's Daf. We're up to Daf Chof Tes. Uh, we're up to Daf Chof Tes. And the last thing we learned was regarding how do we know there's a difference pigul between chutz lezman or chutz lemakom. If you're thinking about the wrong time, where you get chorus, you're thinking that this carbon can be eaten 3 days when it's only shlom in 2 days. You get chorus even if you eat it within the right time. And but chutz lemakom, you don't get chorus. We brought the different views of different psukim. So we're up to Chavtes and Aleph in the middle of the page. Taner Rabbanan, about 15 lines at the top of the page. So we have two psukim. We have one pasuk in the early Chumash Vayikra where there it's a long pasuk, and there we have pigul chutz l'makom chutz l'zman, and then we had in Kedoshim the short pasuk where it says that if you eat, and then following that it says you get kares. So now we have Tonabon. We learned in the Braisa, it says in the pasuk v'him hey ochel ye ochel. If somebody eats mipsar zevach shlamav, if somebody eats from the flesh of a karm shlamim. Now, if you take the pasuk literally, it sounds like you ate it by Yom HaShlishi on the third day. We're talking about Noisa. We already proved that we're not talking about Noisa. We're talking about, and we discussed this all, we're talking about a thought at the time of Shchita, or one of the 4 stages, you thought about, have machshavas about when you're going to eat it. Now the Gemara can say, how do you know to actually not learn the pasuk literally? Maybe it means, Pashad, you ate it on the third day. You know, Amar Ablezer. So Ablezer used the expression, Koif Azlacha, tilt your ear, bend your ear, or force your ear, Lishmoya, to listen what I have to say. We're not talking about somebody who ate it on the third day. We're talking about B'mechashev, Lechel, Mezivche, B'yayim Hashish, you intended to eat it on the third day, but you actually didn't eat it on the third day. How do I know? Maybe Taka means somebody ate it on the third day. It's like Noiser. So we say no. Achad shehu kosher yachze v'yifsel. The Torah says lo yiratze. The Torah says it's not acceptable. Now, if it's talking about noises, so you did everything correctly, you ate it, but you ate a certain part of the carbon in the right time, so you're already forgiven. And just because you ate afterwards on part that you shouldn't have eaten, retrospectively we undo everything. We didn't find something retrospective. You don't find retrospective legislation. So therefore, must be talking about that at the time of the shchita you already did the wrong thing. What do you mean you don't find retrospective legislation? Hey, Matzina, yes, we do find. What about a zav? Someone has an admission, or a zav, a female admission, v'shemedes yom k'neged yom. In the case of a zav or a zav, comes the 7th day, or shemedes yom. If she sees 1 day, you have to then separate for 1 day. You see 2 days, separate for 1 day. And the din is that you can go to the mikveh during the day, and she's officially tired, or if he's a zav, he's officially tired. But they shouldn't have any intimate relations, because if late in the afternoon she spots, then it becomes retrospective and it unravels the Tara. So we see there is such a concept of retrospective legislation. We assume the Torah, but yet the Kivin Shiro, Sasra, it undoes the past. So why can't it be here? You wrote a carbon, everything's all right, but then you ate Noisa on the third day, it retrospectively undoes the entire carbon. Even though so why can't it undo it? Amalei said, okay, I'll tell you how I know. The pasuk says in that very same pasuk, it says after it says it won't be acceptable. Your kapara hamakriv oisa lo yechashiv. It says hamakriv. It sounds like at the time of the hakrava, the time of bringing it up, not the time of the eating it. B'shas hakrava nifsul. The nifsul is not the third day. How do I know? Hamakriv. So maybe when it says hamakriv, is talking about elozeh kohen hamakriv. Maybe talking about the kohen, that the kohen, that the kohen is no longer disqualified from being a kohen. Maybe that's what it means hamakriv. How do you know talking about the carbon b'chlal? Kishuaim, it says oisai. So hamakriv oisai, the one that he brought it. Lo yechashiv, that the it is lo yechashiv. I mean the carbon, the animal is no longer valid. Umedaber cannot about the kohen at all. Anyway, so we learn of the word hamakriv, that it's at the time of the hakrava, not the time of the eating. Ben Azai says, I'll give another explanation. Oisai, that word oisai you just said to teach us talking about the carbon, ma talmud leim. You know why I do the word oisai? Something else altogether. We have a concept that if you make a promise to bring a carbon, you have to bring it within a certain time. We had in Rosh Hashanah, the whole big machlek is how long? 3 Yamim Tavim, Sukkot is the last one, different opinions. So, but otherwise, you're about to acher for delaying. The question is, if you delayed it, do you lose the status of the carbon or not? Ben Azai says, "Oisai ma tamid leimer." Lefisha Nemer it says, "Loisa achel l'shalmai." Shouldn't delay. Yochel af ma'acha nidr. If you delay your neder, also below yiratza. Tamid leimer oisa loyiratza ma'acha nidr below yiratza. We're continuing to learn that the idea of pigul. Because if you read the pasuk literally, it says b'yom hashlishi, on the third day, which sounds like you're talking about somebody ate on the third day. How do you know talking about pigul at the time of shechting and you had the wrong thought in mind and eating at the wrong time, and then you're already chayiv kodesh even if you ate it in the right time? So we bring different opinions. How do you know take the pasuk out of the context? So Rabbi Lezer concludes because it says hamakriv oisei lo yechashiv at the time of the hakrava. How do you know it's talking about then the animal? Maybe it means the coin is disqualified from the moment he's makrabit. Because we say oisai. We're talking about the oisai, the it. The it is the animal. The animal is disqualified. That's one view. Comes along Ben Azai and says, no, I use oisai for something totally different. Chav Tes Samad Aleph, about 7 lines on the bottom of the page. Ben Azai says the whole Gemara of Chav Ches is learning out how do you know that pigul chutzal is manoi. You get kares, a chusum kaim is only allowed. Maybe it's the other way around. So we use the psukim to learn out how different ways of how to figure that one out. So now the Gemara is continuing in that theme. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar, you know what I need oiseh for? To tell you, but only in this case, the animal, if you had this kind of thoughts, the animal becomes disqualified and lo yirotze, it's not a good atonement. But if you're past the use by date, for example, lo yacher, you're not allowed to bring after 3 Tevim, according to one opinion. If you pass the 3 Tevim, the animal is still kosher. You're over allowed for delaying, you're procrastinating, but the animal's still kosher. So this again. So but as it says, what do you know? Only in this case, if he had these terrible thoughts, the ain't a pigul, or but the ain't hamaacha nidre below yirotze. If somebody delays a neder, there's no lo yirotze there. That's okay. That's Benazai. Comes along Achedim, and they say, you want to know how we know that it's not talking about literally somebody ate on the 3rd day, but rather we're talking about at the time of the shchita, you had the wrong thoughts in mind, or the time of the carrying the blood or sprinkling the blood. Because it says in the pasuk, lo yechashev. Lo yechashev is also the word machshava, that you don't have the wrong machshava. So we're talking about at the time when machshavas matter. Not when you lepoil ate it. It's at the time when you were makrivit, when you brought it up. Those 4 stages, the 4 avodas. What thoughts did you have? The machshava nifsal, only in your thoughts. Nothing to do with the 3rd day. So you want to ask a question. Ben that uses the word oisai to tell you that oisai only this doesn't work. But about the animal still kosher. So how does he know it's talking about a carbon? Maybe he's talking about the coin. How do you know that maybe the pasuk is talking about the coin? Since we learned before from Oysa, we're talking about the animal, but you're saying Oysa is coming to teach you something totally different. So maybe it means the coin is disqualified. A coin is mefago, is disqualified. So Gemara says, either nafkale achedim. He learns from achedim. Achedim say that how do you know? Because it's lo yechashiv. Why would the Torah have to add the word lo yechashiv to tell you we're talking about machshava? Otherwise, you would have thought that that we're talking about the kohen, or we're talking about what? Eating the 3rd day. If we're talking about eating the 3rd day, then why do you, then no? We would have thought that it's talking about literally eating the 3rd day. So it says lo yechashiv. No, we're talking about at the time of the stage of machshava. Now, if we're talking about the kohen, that the kohen is disqualified, so the Yisrael eats it on the 3rd day, and the kohen who shechted it 3 days ago is going to be disqualified. Why? We need a pasuk. So the fact that we need a pasuk, the lo yechashiv at the time of machshava, we're talking about the animal itself. That's how I know. Or midiksiv, the word itself, lo yirotze. The lo yirotze zivchu, the expression lo yirotze, it is not an acceptable atonement, is a word you use for the carbon, not a word you use regarding the kohen. Ben Azai says, nothing more is analyzing. Ben Azai said, "Oy soy below yirotze ve'machanida below yirotze." But if you're over about the achir, the animal is still a kosher carbon. So where you learn out from the word oisei. So let me ask a question. We have the same limud by a b'choir, and once you know by a b'choir that there's no such, even though you go past the use by date more than a year old, the carbon is still a valid carbon. So therefore we know all carbonas, even though you're able about ta'achir, you passed the use by date or you delayed it, still it's a kosher carbon. What I need a special pasuk oisei. Now what's the story there? It says the Tanu the Braisa chedim ibrim yochli b'choir shivra shlos hour. Thought a b'choir that's over a year old, gipsuli amigdoshim should be treated like any other carbon that has a mum, has a flaw, and what you do is let it wander about, be falsish, be puzzle, and then you sell it, and till it contracts another mum, and you sell it, and with the money you buy kabbanas, tamaloim. It's in the pasuk v'chaltu lifnei Hashem lekecha. You should eat before the Eibishter, ma'aser de goncha, and it says in the pasuk you should eat your ma'aser, and it says also ubchayris. So we equate ma'aser to b'chayr. What's the connection between ma'aser and b'chayr? Ma'akid b'chayr le'ma'aser. Ma ma'aser ein nifsa b'shor l'chavator. Ma'aser, the 3rd year, you bring all the ma'aseris from the last 3 years. So we say even though you should have brought it in the right time, but if you didn't, you have time to make it up. So av b'chayr, the same thing. Ein nifsa b'shor l'chavator. If it's past a year old, you should bring it within a year. But you brought out. If you brought later, you brought later. It's still a kosher carbon. So what I need a pasuk oisai to tell me that if you made a promise and you went past the 3 Yom Tovim or past Sukkot or past 1 Yom Tov, the 3 different opinions, that you shouldn't, that you have to be able, you can still bring the carbon. You should still bring the carbon. What I need a special pasuk for that? You learn from Meiser. Saying, no, we still need. We would have thought that a carbon is different than b'chayr. Why? We need it. Salke dat. I mean, I would have thought. Hani mili. When do we say that b'chayr? The lav banat soy. B'chayr is not here to appease the Eibishter. It's a chiv. You have to bring the b'chayr. It belongs to the base of Migdash. I will catch him when it comes to all al kabbanas where I'm trying to appease the Eibishter. If I'm doing the wrong thing. So how can you think that you b'shas ma'isa while you're asking the Eibush to be moichel me for my aveda, you do something else wrong. That's menayitz instead of berach. You're taunting. Kamash Rolan. Very interesting. The Ritva in Sukkot Daf Tes learns that and few other places that mitzvah haba ba'aveda is not a general rule in Kol HaTorah Kula. It's only those mitzvahs, because the Gemara only brings it always by certain mitzvahs. Only those mitzvahs that are there to appease the Eibishter. L'mashal, he says, by Kabbalah, Mashal Lulav. Lulav is, we want the winds. We know when you shake the lulav and everything else, we bring in the winds and rain and everything else. So we have we're out to achieve and trying to appease the Eibishter. So he says, whenever you try to appease the Eibishter, b'shas ma'isa, you're doing an aveda. It's not going to work. But other things where there's no, you're not trying to appease the Eibishter to chiv, then this time mitzvah b'aveda. There's other issues. That's why you need by matzah, when Gemara in Pesachim brings psukim that is no good. What do you need that for? It's called mitzvah b'aveda, taste of ass and sukkah, and the flamed, so and so on. And the Mefarshim Achrim ask, where did he forget this from? How does he know to make that distinction? That mitzvah b'aveda is only limited to those mitzvahs that you're trying to appease the Eibishter. Maybe from right here, from this Havamin. The Gemara says that over here, you're doing something wrong, so therefore we would have thought that even though by it's over a year old, you did the wrong thing, no problem, go ahead and do it. It's not even a shaila, because it's a chiv. But the fact is you're fulfilling your chiv. You do something else wrong, so you get patched for that. But you do, but at least you did your chiv. Where you're trying to be to the Eibishter, then we would have thought that no, that given a special pasuk, or you say maybe that's the mock of not that I saw anybody say it, maybe. Anyway. Taking about it further, Vakati Mahasam Nafka, we learn from elsewhere. What do we need a pasuk oisa? We learn from it says if you did the wrong thing, you made a promise and you didn't do the right thing. So it says by the sugya about ta'ach, it says you should have a sin. But you, the carbon did anything wrong, bring it up anyway. So what do I need oisa for? Tomorrow says because Ben Azai, what Ben Azai does with that pasuk? Not your wife. What do you mean not your wife? Because I would have thought, in some cases, if you did an Aveda, the effects, the ramifications, you're going to hurt your family as well. You know what? That your wife will suffer if they ask from you money that you owe and you don't have. It says, if you don't have what to pay, why should your bed take away from your wife, take away from you? Rashi says, it's talking about Gzela. You stole. And in other words, the way Rashi seems to be learning Pshat is that not bringing the carbon to the Eibishter after a promise like you're stealing from the Eibishter. The moment you made a promise, it belongs to the Eibishter. And now that you didn't make it, now you're not keeping it, it's like he's stealing from the Eibishter. Taisa doesn't like the Pshat at all. He doesn't like it talking about stealing. He says it's talking about the promise itself. Because the Gemara Shabbos says that Ba'oven Nedarim, you affect your wife and your children. Maybe Rashi doesn't learn that way because there it says children as well. And here it says only your wife. Anyway, so... Is behind Mesa. We would have thought that in case it's a promise. In fact, so the Rashi is learning Baltach is like stealing from the Eibishter. And Teza learns Baltach is a promise. Same thing. You made a promise and you're not keeping it. Kamash that no, only you'll suffer for this, not your wife. Others say the last opinion was, how do you know that it's talking about what? That I'm not talking about eating the third day, but rather talking about the person who's mechashiv, b'machshava, nifso, v'nisa, b'shlishi. Because it said lo yachashiv, we're talking about at the time of shechting what thoughts were. But Abelezer, he learns from Hamakriv. What does he do with the words lo yachashiv? The Torah already said in that passage lo yiratza. Why does it say lo yachashiv? What is it coming to add? My Avilei, what's it coming to add that pasuk? So Gemara says, it's coming to add. He needs for Rabbi Yanai. If you have a machshava pigul, it ruins the animal. You get karis or a lav. But if you have machshava pigul, and then you have another machshava, for example, that the wrong name for the carbon, so then we say that the two machshavas cancel each other out. When you have a pigul, the only aveda you did was pigul. If there's another machshava that ruins the carbon aside from the pigul, then it's not pigul. How do I know that? From lo yeh chashev. That means what? Don't have the machshava shelo yeh chashev lo added by machshava lechedes. In order to be pigul, that you should not have other machshavas that distort it. But Amori Masni he learns from lo yeh chashev. You know how do you know that if you think mekachim you get malchus? But okay, you didn't have Veda, you had a wrong thought. You had pigul. It's one thing you ruin the animal. Another, and you didn't have Veda. But not only that, you can get malchus as well. How do you get malchus? And it says lo yeh chashev. It's a lav. Lo yeh chashev. How can you get malchus? It's a lav. You know maisa. B'chol hashem maisa ain't like no malchus. A lav that has no maisa, you do get malchus. Now, all the Foshim ask because we know the shittas we discussed a few days ago that according to Rashi and a few other Rishonim, it's not enough to think; it's also you have to say. And then you have a shit of places in the end of Metzias, and then you have at other places where Taisus says that if the saying like Tamura makes it happen, then the saying is like a ma'isa. So therefore, l'chayda, since the saying over here makes the pigul, according to the shittas or the Rishonim hold that you have to say pigul. The saying makes the pigul, so it is a ma'isa. Why are you saying it only according to Rabbi Yehuda? So unless even when those shittas that hold you have to say, there's two ways of understanding. One way is that the saying makes it happen. The other way is that the saying reveals to us what the machshav is. That so the saying is not what makes it happen. The machshav makes it happen. But to make the machshava concrete or bring into the world, you say it to reveal the machshava. So if you learn, like those shittas in Acharonim, that the saying is merely revealing machshava, that's not the same thing as by Tamura, where by Tamura the saying is not just to reveal machshava, the words themselves is what makes it happen, and that's why that's considered a ma'isa. Maybe. Next Mishnah, now the Mishnah is going to explain all about pigul. This is the rule. Kol hashaych. Remember that 4 stages. You shech, mekabel, you receive the blood. Mahalach, you walk with the blood. Vazed, you sprinkle in the zevach. So now you did it. Lechel dover shadaka lechel ulahaka dover shadaka. And we learned before I read this Mishnah, which says that what? Only that you thought about that which belongs to Mizbech, about the activity of the Mizbech, the wrong time, as in the wrong place, or the activity, or that activity that applies to you, consume the food at the wrong time, the wrong place. So so this is what happened. You thought kazayis chutz lemekayma. You thought one kazayis, even though the animal's a lot more than one kazayis, but you thought just one kazayis chutz lemekayma. One kazayis you're going to eat outside the right place. Or for the mizbeach, you're going to roast it. That belongs on the mizbeach. The fat, you're going to put it outside. The ain by karis. That's called chutz lemekayma. You don't get karis, and the entire animal is possible, not just like kazayis, which is different than tumah we had yesterday. Chutz lizmanoi. What about if it's outside of the time? That's pigul v'chayom l'karis. The same thought, but if you thought about the wrong time, you get karis, even though you ate it within the right time. But when is this avedik sheyakriv hamatik kimitzvasei? The matit is you have to go through the 4 stages, and the matit is the last stage, which is sprinkling the blood. If the blood was poured out from the keli before you sprinkle on mizbeach, then there's no sprinkling. Then there's no matit here, and then there's no pigul. It has to be that you went through all the stages. And then we say, it was pigul and you get kodesh or whatever allowed. Kate, so now the Mishnah will spell it out. Interesting, the Mishnah goes mamash into detail. What do you mean? What does it mean you did the matik mitzvah? So this is what happened. Shachad b'shtika, you shechted correctly. You kibul b'hal v'zara chutz l'zmani. Then one of the next stages, one of them. Either you makabel blood, or you walked, or you sprinkled, then you had a mind chutz l'zmani. Oy sheshacha chutz l'zmani, or you shechted it and you had a mind chutz l'zmani. And then the kibul or the kibul or halach or zarek b'shtika. You did everything else correctly. So you did everything correctly. You went through all 4 stages. Oisha shachat, the kibul, the halach. You did all these things. But v'zarek chutzas mani. Let's say you shechted and everything else, and then correctly, and only the zikah was chutzas mani. Zehu shemakiv hamatik kimitzvasim. That's an example. You did everything correctly, but you had one thought which was wrong. That's pigul. What about what's an example of kates of loy kor of hamatik kimitzvasim? What's an example you didn't do correctly? You might have other thoughts. For example, shachat chutz l'mekayme. You shechted having in mind chutz l'mekayme. Okay, that should be pigul. But then Kibul v'holach v'zodik. He did one of the next stages, chutzas manai. You had another thought. On one of the next stages, chutzas manai. Now you had two thoughts, two avedis. Oy sheshachat chutzas manai. You shechted thinking chutzas manai. The kibul v'zodik chutzas mekayme. Oy sheshachat shechted the kibul v'holach, but then v'zodik chutzas mekayme. And one stage of it, another stage is the chutzas manai. Or ha-pesach v'achat shechted shloilishman. You shechted the pesach shloilishman, and then the kibul v'holach chutzas manai. So you had another aveda there besides the aveda of pigul. Or besides the Aveda Chutzas Mani, Chutzas Mekayme. Chutzas Mani, and Kibbutz Lishman. And any one of the other stages you had in mind for a Chatzas and a Pesach, which are both disqualified, Lo Lishman. Oy, Sheshachad v'Kibbutz v'Holach v'Zor Dam Lishman. Or you did, one of them Chutzas Mekayme, and another stage Lo Lishman. Zeu Shlekadav Hamati Kimitzvase. That's called it wasn't done correctly. And you didn't know, but you had another thought that ruined it. Okay, what happens? Lechel kezayis bechutz kezayis lemachar. Now the Mishnah seems to be repeating itself. You had one thought to eat a kezayis outside, and then you had another thought to eat a kezayis tomorrow. So you had pigul of chutz lemakom, and then you had another thought of chutz man. Kezayis lemachar. So this is a repetition of the first part, and the chiddush will be Rabbi Yehuda, and we'll see in the one later. Is there another chiddush involved here? As we'll soon see. Kezayis lamoch, kezayis bechutz, kechat yizayis bechutz. It's a half a zayis outside. Kechat yizayis lamoch. So they combine the half a zayis, but it's two separate avedas. Kechat lamoch, kechat yizayis bechutz. Possible, maybe kaddish. All these are possible, but there's no kaddish over here. There's no kaddish. They combine. There's no kaddish. Omer Rabbi Yehuda says zeh klal. This is the rule. Kol shemach sheves hazman kodma. He says, are you saying that if you had one thought by Shchita, another thought by Kabbalah, the second thought ruins the first thought, there's no pigula? No. It depends what the first thought is. The first thought is what establishes it is. So if Machsheves has man was first, the first thing you thought Chutzas Manai, then I don't care if the next activity you thought Chutzas Mekayme. That's pigul. If Machsheves Makim pigul and Chayav and Avakaris. If Machsheves Makim Kabbalah, if the first thought Machsheves man possible, but ain't Bakaris. The Chachamim say Zeb is a possible in Kodesh. In all cases, you puzzle, and there is no Kodesh at all. And we'll soon discuss all this. Lechol kechatzi zayis. If you, let's say, thought that you're going to eat a half a zayis, ulehakti chatzi zayis, and you thought both of them you do the wrong time, but two different activities. One of them was to eat you, and one of them for the mizbeach. Pasha. One thing I'm going to eat a half a kazayis, you combine them. But I'm going to eat a half a kazayis and the mizbech will eat half a kazayis, that they don't combine. So now again, ilfa. Remember we said that ilfa is found more in Kachim than anywhere else. Ahmad ilfa. Machlek is ilfa and his friend Rabbi Yechon. Ilfa says machlek is the whole machlek is Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham is b'shtei avodas, two separate activities. You had first by shchita you had one thought, and by zrika you had another thought. Says Rabbi Yehuda. Whatever your first thought is at the time of the shechita, that's what counts. The other ones don't count at all. And the Chachamim say, no, we don't that because two separate avodas. Machlekes b'shtei avodas, says Ilfa. If during the shechita you thought that you're going to have one kazayis you thought chutz l'mekayme, and then another kazayis you thought chutz l'zmanoi, then there's no machlekes. Everyone agrees that there's no. Even Rabbi Yehuda will agree the first one didn't have a chance to establish itself because you haven't finished yet the job. So therefore, you're having two avedas in your mind here, there's no pigul. Then even hakol eidu machshavas, it's a mix of machshavas and there's no pigul there. But Rabbi Yechon said no. Even one avodah, whatever you thought for Rabbi Yechon holds, the main thing is first lashon rishon. Whatever you say first is what establishes itself. Machlekes. That even avodah achas machlekes. Now, first of all, Bishlam from the in the beginning, clearly the Mishnah spells out all the examples to the Avodas, so the whole Mishnah is two Avodas. The first half of the Mishnah talks about examples of two Avodas, and the second one you're going to tell me is talking about the same Avodah. What changed? I said, yeah, in. That's in fact the chiddush of the Sefer, as we'll see in a minute. What's the difference in the Sefer and the Reisha is that the Sefer is adding another layer, and that other layer is, even in the same Avodah, Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, whatever you say first counts. In fact, Tanan we learned, Rabbi Yehuda Zeklal. Rabbi Yehuda adds the word Zeklal. This is the rule. That's the rule. What Rabbi Yehuda give a rule? If basically he covered all the examples, what's Zeklal is when you want to add something. What's he adding? He's always adding, because the first part of the Mishnah is talking about two separate avodas. Zeklal is that even it's the same avodah, whatever your first thought is, That's what it is. Eliufa my Zaklau. According to Ilfa, which the whole mission is talking about two Avedas. So what's the second half adding Zaklau? We already explained to us all the possibilities. Rabbi Yehuda always owes two separate Avedas. The first thing you said is what counts. But it's Takiv is one Aveda. They're mixed together and there's no pickle there. So we'll pause.